All right, everyone, welcome in to week 16 of the Instant Review podcast. This is the last show of 2021. We are so close to the end of this regular season as we get ready for 2022 and the NFL playoffs. My name is Nicholas Hill, joined by Leon Taryan and Conor Kennedy as always. And guys, this playoff picture continues to be one of the craziest that I've ever seen while following the NFL. And I'm really excited to see how the last 2 weeks shake out and determine who's going to be playing for a chance to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's going to be weird. There's going to be some good teams that are going to miss the playoffs, and that would have been really fun to watch, in January. And then there's going to be a couple teams that I think are going to be complete wild cards, especially considering going into the season that are going to be in it too. I can't wait.
Just madness all over the AFC. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know what's going to happen. This year has been fun. It's been crazy. It's been everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the wildest in memory. Of course, the additional week that was added for this year has certainly created the chaos that I think it was intended to. And we're going to go all into that in just a moment. But first, we are going to take a minute here to honor the legacy of John Madden. Of course, John Madden died earlier today at the age of 85. And he was a legend, obviously Super Bowl winning head coach of the Oakland Raiders, had a career record of 103, 32, and 7 in 10 years between 1969 and 1978. Won the Super Bowl in 1976 with the Raiders. And then from there had a legendary career as a broadcaster on all major networks. Of course, best known for being on Fox with Pat Summerall. Legendarily did a lot of the Thanksgiving games, did a lot of the Monday Night Football games in the 2000s with Al Michaels, and then moved over when NBC started Sunday Night Football in 2006 and finished out his career from there. And, obviously we're all young. We're in our early 20s, so we don't remember a ton of his calling. Of course, I've gone back personally and watched some of his games on YouTube that he did with Summerall. And to me, he seemed like, I feel like a modern commentator like a Tony Romo does a lot of similar things in terms of the way they approach the game in college. But, I just think the impact that John Madden has had on NFL is immeasurable. Of course, obviously off the field, he's known as the namesake of the Madden football games. Of course, that started in the mid-90s and is now one of the most popular video game franchises in existence. And, that combined with his commentating has helped the NFL become the biggest sports league in America and perhaps the biggest sports league in the entire world. And it would be remiss not to mention him. And obviously all of our thoughts are with his family and all of his friends because we all know, just from watching him on TV, just how big of a personality he was and the impact that he left. And I don't know how much I'll remember of him because I remember bits and pieces of him calling games when I was a little kid back in 06, 07 on NBC. I don't know if all of you remember him calling any games, but certainly I played a lot of Madden growing up. I know a lot of you played Madden growing up. Just what are your thoughts on what John Madden meant to the NFL?
John Madden absolutely changed the game, at least in terms of broadcasting. I mean, he's always been emulated by a lot of these personalities. Tony Romo, I forget the name of the Cowboys QB for some reason, or the other one. Sorry. Like a lot of these guys, like Chris Collinsworth, but it's never really been duplicated that well. Just his charisma and the ability to really help you feel invested within that game and just the game of football in general. It kind of just felt like you were watching the game with him in the room while he was calling these games. And yeah, he's left an indelible mark on the broadcasting world in football and has helped develop a love of football in a lot of people.
I mean, there are times where I like to go on NFL Network and hear some of the highlights that he had broadcasting games, and he was such an influential voice within the game of football. And Nick was talking about video games and how all the games are named after him and how he helps continue that legacy that we started as little kids going into the future. So his legacy will always continue, and may he rest in peace.
I just remembered that I was talking about Troy Aikman in terms of the other Cowboys quarterback. I don't know why I forgot his name. He kicked my Bills' ass in the 90s. But yeah, that's just a side note.
Yeah. I saw a video the other day, actually, because there's a guy I follow who does a lot of NFL content on YouTube, talking about historical games, really weird broadcast. And he actually just did a video the other day on a game where Pat Summerall and John Madden called a division-free football game on CBS. And just think about how many NFL commentators today would go and call it a division-free football game. I don't think any of them would. But John Madden loved the game of football so much that he was willing to go and call a game between two schools that 99% of Americans had never heard of and give those players that exposure. Because most of those players were never going to get to the NFL. They were never going to play football beyond that level. But he was such an ambassador for this sport that, we kind of have to sit back and really think him. Because you got to remember, back when he started broadcasting in the 70s and 80s, yes, football was very popular, but it still was second to baseball. Like the MLB was the king before the 80s and 90s, but then the NFL took over, and it's now truly America's pastime because, baseball has a historic nickname. But I think someone like John Madden really helped it become the sport in America and what so many people base their falls and winters around. And for that, we should always be eternally grateful to what John Madden was able to bring in terms of his broadcast and in terms of his influence in the video games, and just as a football coach too, because he's a fantastic coach. Won 75% of his games. I mean, just impressive at every single thing he did, succeeded at everything he did. And certainly he will be missed by everyone who loves football. Do either of you have any last thoughts on him?
Just to add on to what you were talking about, I mean, one of the great things about John Madden was that you could not know a lick about football, but let's say you're like watching one of the Super Bowls that he called, or just a game on the TV. With some of these announcers, you can kind of honestly just turn the sound off. But with John Madden, it's like he could suck you in, even if you don't know anything about football whatsoever. His energy and an enthusiasm for the game would draw you in instantly.
Absolutely, I agree. It's definitely a massive loss, and certainly we'll be hearing a lot about it over the weekend. I'm sure they're going to do all kinds of tributes this weekend at all the different NFL games. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see all the different tributes by players and teams throughout the remainder of the season. I'm sure at the Super Bowl, there's probably going to be a major tribute to him because he is such a massive figure to the sport of football. But I'm sure John Madden wants us to talk about some of the games that happened over Christmas weekend, and I certainly hope that everyone had a fantastic Christmas. But now it is time to get ready to ring in 2022 with a really big Week 17. And some of the results this weekend have certainly made things really, really interesting. I'm going to kick it off to Leon because I know you want to talk about a game that happened on Christmas night itself and the potential ramifications that might have on both AFC and NFC playoff pictures.
So the Colts beat the Cardinals 22-16. Quentin Nelson is on the COVID-19 reserve list, and Jonathan Taylor still runs for over 100 yards in that game, still proves why he is the best running back in the league this season. Man, it's just unbelievable what the Colts have been doing. I would say right now they're the hottest team in football, the hottest team in the AFC, and watch out for them to make a Super Bowl run because I don't think the Chiefs can do it this year, and I think the only team standing in the way of the Colts is the New England Patriots. So Carson Wentz looks reborn in Indianapolis, young wide receivers, a great defense, and I'm looking forward to the AFC playoffs and the entire playoffs in general.
Yeah, I mean, the Indianapolis Colts, I said last week that I thought they had the best running game in football, and of course that's certainly the case. But what Jonathan was able to do without, four of his offensive linemen was extremely impressive, go over 100 yards. But I think really a lot of credit has to go to Carson Wentz because, a lot of the criticism of Carson Wentz is that he hasn't been turning over, is that he turns over the football and he loses his team's games. And that's probably a big reason why they're not going to win the division is because he had some crucial turnovers against the Tennessee Titans. in those 2 games, and that's why they didn't win either one of those games. But right now, I wouldn't pick the Titans to beat the Colts. Now, obviously, for the Colts to win a division, they have to win their last 2 games against the Raiders and Jaguars. The Titans have to lose their 2 games against the Dolphins and the Texans. Chances of that, I don't think are great, but they're certainly not 0. And even if the Colts don't get everything they need to win the division, I think they're going to win their last 2 games and get that 5 seed and play whoever is the 4 seed. Right now, that would be the Buffalo Bills. And they're not a team you want to face right now, especially if they can be fully healthy, get over all the COVID issues that they're currently plaguing them. Because you got to remember, too, they also won that game without Darius Leonard on defense, their best defensive player. And they really made Kyler Murray look just terrible. I mean, he was running for his life, could not make accurate throws on the run all night. The only effective player on that offense was Chase Edmonds, being able to catch balls out of the backfield, which was really similar to the week before against the Rams, where James Conner had that role, where he was catching a lot of balls in the backfield, was able to get some first downs. But without DeAndre Hopkins on the outside, this Cardinals offense has just fallen apart. They look awful. And it's kind of what I've been warning about all year, because I've been telling you, if you look at Cliff Kingsbury's track record, he always falls apart at the end of the season. Going all the way back to when he had Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech in college football. His teams start off hot, they fall off at the end, and this team is doing the same thing. Now, luckily for the Cardinals, they're going to make the playoffs. They've clinched their playoff spot. But I don't have any faith in them to win a playoff game. And we're going to look at the playoff picture here in a little bit. But, I mean, I don't see this team doing anything once they get to January.
Yeah, just circling back to the Colts. Like I've said this before, and I'll say it again. They're probably the most solid team in the entire NFL. Obviously, one of, if not the best offensive line in the entire league. The best running back in the league that's healthy right now. I still think the number 1 running back is Derrick Henry. A great defense led by Darius Leonard, DeForest Buckner, rookie pass rusher Kwity Paye, who's done really well in his first season as a Colt. Xavier Rhodes in the corner position, and Carson Wentz, like he's definitely improved from his last season as a Philadelphia Eagle, but they don't even need to rely on him that much in order to win. And it's not like he really messes things up either. Well, he did a lot earlier on in the season. Part of why they started out 0-3 and why they might not win the division. But they're looking like probably the best team in the AFC right now besides the Chiefs. They're a team that you do not want to see come postseason. And And then in the Cardinals case, obviously they had a hot start. I think they started 7-0 or 8-0. Obviously they lost that first game to the Packers. And then I think ever since their bye week, they've just been on a skid. I had some faith in this team, after that strong start, but I should have listened to you, Nick. They really did fall apart like every other season that Cliff Kingsbury has been their head coach. They have a losing record, I think, in the latter half of the season, and each of the seasons that Cliff Kingsbury has coached with the Arizona Cardinals. This team has a pretty high ceiling. They did really well in free agency, bringing in AJ Green, who I think still has a little juice left in him. JJ Watt, who's injury prone, but can be productive when he's on the field. And I think that he could be back come playoff time. They have a pretty good defense and obviously potent offense as long as DeAndre Hopkins is on the field. James Conner has had a career year. And Zach Ertz has really bounced back this season. He's looking like 2017 Zach Ertz, honestly, as part of this Cardinals offense. But Kyler Murray has shown some cracks. He's certainly not the MVP candidate that he was, at least the first month or two within the season. He's been somewhat prone to turnovers. And I think he can't completely rely on his as athleticism in order to win games for this Cardinals team. So I could see them winning a playoff game, but honestly, I don't really know where they go after that.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were going to win the NFC West, and now it looks like the Rams are going to take over that, which is kind of embarrassing because you do get to a really hot start with Kyler Murray and the offense. And then with the Colts, Carson Wentz just went on the COVID-19 list, so we're going to see Sam Ehlinger start this next game against Vegas, I think, right, Nick? The
Yeah,
Colts play the Raiders. And who do they play in Week 18, the Colts? The Jaguars?
So like this is really their last chance, in my opinion, for them to actually win or to lose. Like, because obviously you got to remember too, for the Colts, if they lose, they're done in the AFC South race. No matter what the Titans do, like they have to win their last two games, and Titans have to lose their last two games. So that's definitely huge news coming out now for the Colts.
Is that at home?
Yeah, that's the home game for Indy.
A positive for them though is that the NFL, I think a couple hours ago, tweaked their COVID-19 rules and regulations to mirror what the CDC changed them to. I think what the CDC changed them to either today or late yesterday. So I think Carson Wentz, even though he is unvaccinated, as long as he's asymptomatic, he'd only have to quarantine for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that he could play come Sunday, playing the Las Vegas Raiders. But I feel like even if he doesn't play, they're not going to put too much on Sam Ehlinger's shoulders. So Jonathan Taylor could really carry this offense. And then maybe, throw in some quick throws for Sam over to Pittman and Hilton, as well as Mo Alley Cox. But I don't know. I mean, they could blow this game, but honestly, I don't think the Raiders are that good. I mean, kind of like the Cardinals, they're on a skid, like they have been these past couple seasons. They'll start out really hot and then they'll fall apart. So yeah, I still think the Colts have a pretty good chance, whether Carson Wentz is on the field or not.
I mean, I think Ehlinger will probably have a better debut than Ian Book did
Yeah,
last night against Miami, but he's got, I would say, compared to Ian Book, Ehlinger has more to work with. If they could try some trickery here, they could maybe go pass heavy, because I'm certainly think that the Raiders will anticipate feeding the ball to Taylor constantly during the game. So I wonder how the strategy of the game will work out. And with the Cardinals, who even knows if they could get a playoff win this year? I still think they will make it, but doesn't look good for them in the playoffs. I certainly think that they would have to add more, and like we're seeing before, there are a lot of quarterbacks that are making their playoff debut this season. Kyler Murray, Mac Jones, it looks like, Joe Burrow, which is what it looks like. So we're going to see how these quarterbacks play in the playoffs with no experience whenever the games matter.
Yeah. And really, we're going to start seeing that this week. Like, I think about a player like a Tua Tagovailoa, going up to Nashville in what's going to be potentially a must-win game for the Miami Dolphins. Right now, they have that 7 seed after starting 1-7. But every game from here on out for them is a playoff game. So I'm really curious to see how a player like Tua Tagovailoa and some of these other young quarterbacks who's never been in the situation. Of course, too, you got a player like a Trey Lance, who might start this week for the 49ers in place of Jimmy Garoppolo, who has a high ankle sprain. How does he handle a potentially big-time pressure playoff scenario, the type of game? So it's going to be an extremely interesting week in terms of these different quarterbacks. In terms of how the Raiders are going to approach this, obviously, I think you got to sell out for Jonathan Taylor. They have the 19th ranked rush defense, so not the worst by close. But if you are curious who the worst team is, it's actually the Steelers, giving up 142.7 yards per game. The Raiders are giving up 115 yards per game of rushing. And obviously, as we saw, Jonathan Taylor got 100 yards about a rushing line, so he'll get his big runs. But I think if you can hold Jonathan Taylor to like 100, 110, 120, maybe you can force Ehlinger into some mistakes and find a way to win. Of course, Darren Waller, he's apparently practicing again this week. So he might be available again, and that would be huge because they've been missing him dearly. Because right now, Hunter Renfrow has been their best target since Thanksgiving. And Renfrow has been a really good slot receiver, but he should not be your wide receiver number one. Of course, they lost Henry Ruggs a couple months ago, so they've kind of lacked that true big-time threat downfield. Without Carson Wentz, though, they certainly have a shot. And I think it'll be the team who can minimize their mistakes the most here. And of course, the Colts are going to probably have a really conservative game plan. But the Raiders, I think, have to be the opposite. They got to be really aggressive to find a way and steal the game here in Indianapolis. But moving on, I kind of want to stay in the NFC here for a moment. Talk about that Sunday night game, the Dallas Cowboys. My goodness, I don't know if that might have been one of the most dominant halves of NFL football I've ever seen. I think most one of the most dominant halves I've ever seen. I think about the butt fumble game between the Patriots and Jets from Thanksgiving in 2011, I think, and the Patriots were up 35-3 at halftime. That doesn't happen very often in the NFL, but the Cowboys were up 42-7 at halftime. Just an absolute beatdown. The Washington football team had no answers for the Cowboys. They couldn't get to Dak Prescott. Prescott could have sat down, had a nice dinner, read a book in the time that he needed to throw the ball down the field, and to CeeDee Lamb, to Dalton Schultz, to whoever was down the field. And obviously, Ezekiel Elliott had a good first half, and they were just on fire. And they looked like a legitimate championship contender against a Washington football team that's, they're not good, but they're not just objectively just awful either. But I'll tell you who was objectively awful, though. Taylor Heineke. Just one of the worst performances I've seen him have. The offensive line for Washington just had no chance against the front seven. Micah Parsons was everywhere. Of course, Trayvon Diggs got his 11th interception of the season. And it was a bad night to be a Washington football fan. Of course, I don't know how many days have been good for the last 20 years to be a Washington football fan, but this really was not a good night as they lose 56-14. Guys, do we think this basically ends Washington's season? And for the Cowboys, right now they're the 2 seed. If everyone were to win out, they would actually drop to 3 because they lose a tiebreaker with the Buccaneers because of that Week 1 game they had on that Thursday night. But do we think this is the year the Cowboys finally break a 24-year drought to get to the NFC Championship game?
Nope.
I doubt it.
No way.
They're the Cowboys. Now that I will say this is probably the best Cowboys team that we've seen since the Super Bowl days. And that's including that Dak Prescott team in 2016 that went 13-3. But at the same time, there's still some serious flaws. In that Washington game, both sides of the ball were humming, but we haven't really seen both sides of the ball get it together in a single game for most of the time this season. I think that Chiefs game, even though Amari Cooper and a couple of their other offensive weapons were injured in that game, I still don't completely trust them. And of course, the Cowboys, in this post Jimmy Johnson Super Bowl era, they have the tendency to choke in the first or second round of the playoffs. There's that Green Bay game, I think in 2016, we could just keep rattling off games, honestly. But yeah, just something about them I don't really trust. And I don't think that they're the best team in the NFC either. Also, I think the Packers are probably better. I have my doubts about Tampa, but it's a Brady team. I feel like I'd probably see them in the NFC Championship game over the Cowboys. Clearly they're the best team in their division, but that's not really hard to do. I just don't really see them going too far into the playoffs necessarily, but I could be proven wrong. But I don't think they're a Super Bowl team either.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the tiebreaker with the Bucks based on seeding. I think they win one game with dominance in the wild card, and then they lose in the divisional round. I was talking to Nick several weeks back whenever we were commentating a game. We went so far to say that if the 49ers have Jimmy G, they could upset the Cowboys in the playoffs, but doesn't look like it with injury. I'm not too sure what's really going to happen with him come sometime soon, but I take the Packers over the Cowboys in the playoffs. The Bucks, I'd even take the Rams over the Cowboys. They will find a way to choke. So I'm not too optimistic about them being a Giants fan, and let's hope they don't win in the playoffs.
Yeah, because certainly all the Cowboys fans online are going to be screaming their heads off if they make a deep playoff run and end that long streak of not making it deep. But I'll say this year, this is definitely the best year of Dak Prescott's career. He looks so much more confident in the pocket than he did a couple of years ago. Of course, you got two solid running backs. You know, they're not elite. Of course, Ezekiel Elliott isn't what he was as a rookie, but he still can get some production. Not the best runner within the tackles, but I noticed the other night he was used really well in the receiving game, which is huge. And of course, when you have Amari Cooper healthy, which they necessarily didn't the other night, but when they bring him back in to the fold with CeeDee Lamb, who just had a great game on Sunday night, I think that this is one of the most dynamic offenses, probably the second most dynamic offense after the Bucks, all things considered, of all the weapons that they still have. And really, where the difference is the defense. Micah Parsons, uh, you know, Trayvon Diggs, and really, I think about both those guys are rookies, which is insane. Think about like if Dallas is able to keep these guys for a decade, we could see like a Seattle Legion of Boom type defense set up here because you're thinking about they got Dan Quinn, the same DC in Seattle who's now with Dallas, so he could conceivably kind of recreate the Legion of Boom down there. Consider, kind of depending on who else to get. Of course, DeMarcus Lawrence on that front line is insane. That one interception he had where he basically just jumped up and just kind of came down with it. I mean, that was one of the craziest plays of the year, and they made poor Tyler Heineke look like he still belonged at Old Dominion in the CUSA. Just not did not look like he belonged on an NFL football field, and I think that pretty much ended Heineke's chance of being the long-term solution in Washington, because right now the only two weapons you can consistently count on with Washington are Antonio Gibson and Terry McLaurin. And they need a better quarterback in order to take advantage of those two strengths a lot more. So I'm very curious to see what they do. There's a chance, especially where they're going to be drafting, probably somewhere in the mid-first round. They're probably going to go with the QB. I'd be curious to see if they end up with Matt Corral, Kenny Pickett, or Malik Willis. It's probably going to be one of those three. So I don't know which one of those three would be the best fit in Washington. Like, do you think they should go draft, or do you think there's a shot they could get one of these quarterbacks on the free agency market, like potentially a Russell Wilson, or also? Cause I doubt Russell Wilson would want to go to Washington just because, if I were a free agent, I would stay as far away as possible from a Dan Snyder ran organization. But who knows?
I don't know. I'd say free agency, but going back to that point about the Cowboys, even though I'm not a Cowboys fan, I will say right now that Dak Prescott is probably the greatest leader in football currently. His team just rallies around him. He's a great captain of that team and a great leader. Like, they really believe in him. And I saw in the interview, he's just so positive about this team. Well, I don't think they'll make it far in the playoffs. I think you're looking at someone that can be a future MVP of this team and of the league.
So I'd like to go back to Washington a little bit in terms of what Nick was asking about their QB situation. You look at their team history, at least for the past like maybe 9 or 10 years. Like, they had that one season with RG3 where he played lights out for a rookie, and then through the organization's incompetence, he was injured quite a bit. So he was not the same player after that lights out rookie season. So they move on to Kirk Cousins, and he's good, but he's not necessarily that inspiring. I will say. And then they, move on from Kirk Cousins, trade for Alex Smith. They start off pretty good. But obviously Alex Smith was still a limited quarterback, and not to mention that absolutely horrific injury that he suffered in 2018. They draft Dwayne Haskins. He's a big bust. So they move on from him. And then there's Taylor Heineke. He played pretty well in that wild card game against the Buccaneers. So they keep him around. They sign Ryan Fitzpatrick, which isn't that inspiring either, but I felt like they could do something with him if he didn't turn over the ball too much. He wasn't all that bad in Miami. And he definitely saved the day in Miami on some occasions last season. But then he gets hurt. I think first or second quarter of kickoff day. So they just stick with Taylor Heineke, and we've seen some good games from him, but he's a pretty limited quarterback. There's a reason why he went undrafted. And there's a reason why he was in med school until about a year ago, when the quarterback room in Washington was torn up to shreds, basically. I think he's a high-end backup, maybe a low-tier starter. But I think they really need to seriously address the quarterback position this offseason, because I kind of just feel like the same thing is going to happen every season with Washington. If they don't, they'll just kind of circle into a cycle of mediocrity, at least offensively. And, when you don't have a quarterback in this passing heavy league, you aren't really going to go that far. And you definitely won't win a Super Bowl with Taylor Heineke.
I would highly recommend them not getting Mike Glennon. That's a no-go in the offseason. But for some reason, I think free agency, I don't really know a Washington football team fan, but I'm sure some of them really rally behind Taylor Heineke, especially around that November month where they went 4-0, how they did get revenge on Tom Brady for beating them in the wild card matchup. But if we are being honest, they probably will go for Matt Corral from Ole Miss, but I just see them being a middle-of-the-pack team that could barely make the playoffs in the next couple of years. I think there's a great defense there. There's pieces on that offense, but you have to get that quarterback position solved. But there are times where a player like Antonio Gibson can bail out Taylor Heineke if he doesn't play well. So there's a lot to work with on that offense.
Yeah, I think that they're certainly going to have one of the most interesting off seasons, because, with the young talent they have, they can't afford to miss on this next quarterback. And I think it's going to be hard for them to get the quarterback necessary, but certainly with competent leadership, they could potentially do it. So we'll see what happens with the Washington football team. So I kind of want to move on to discuss the NFL playoff picture. And we have a graphic here that I'm going to pop up. See. Okay. So, obviously, you see right now, the Chiefs and the Packers both have the 1 seed. In the AFC, currently the Titans, Bengals, and Bills all have their respective division leads, with the Colts, the Patriots, and the Dolphins currently having the free wildcard spots. In the NFC, the Cowboys, Rams, and Buccaneers have the other free division leads, with the Cardinals, Niners, and the Eagles holding the last 3 spots. And of course, AFC teams still in contention include the Ravens, the Chargers, the Raiders, the Steelers. Technically, the Browns and the Broncos still have chances. And then in the NFC, we have the Vikings, Falcons, Saints, and the Washington football team, although I don't really see them getting them without some insane miracle. So, just looking at the current playoff pictures, just what stands out to you and on either side? What team right now do you think has the best shot that maybe that's currently outside of getting in, or what team that's currently in you think it's going to fall out?
Something that's crazy to me, especially considering where they were a couple months ago, is seeing the Dolphins at the 7th seed, 8-7. They have an outside shot. They play the Titans and the Patriots over these next couple weeks. But, with the way they've been playing, they have the potential to win out and potentially clinch the 6th seed and knock the Pats off to the 7th seed. I feel like they always split games with the Patriots in the regular season, no matter how good or bad they are. 2019, the season that they were tanking for Tua, they won in Foxborough and knocked the Patriots out of the 2nd seed, so they didn't get a first-round bye and had to play in the wild card round. And Nick knows what happened in that game, the end of the Patriots dynasty. Good side note, but they split games with the Patriots in 2020 also. They split games in 2018 with that Miami Miracle, that awesome trick play. They already beat the Patriots, and I don't know, they could beat them. But also in terms of that Titans game, actually, I'm going to save that for later. I'm going to talk about that in the bets. But, Tua's been efficient. Their defense is really good and was definitely on full display last night. They were playing Ian Book. Notre Dame quarterbacks aren't that great in this league unless it's the 1970s you're talking about. So it isn't too impressive, but they still played really well. They really shut down that Saints offense. And they've been pretty potent, over these past 7 games, especially in that Baltimore game. They completely shut down Lamar Jackson, and everyone thought that he was an MVP candidate for that game. So this team has a lot of potential, and I won't guarantee that they'll make the playoffs, but I think it's possible.
They have so much momentum. I remember whenever I saw them play, Tua Tagovailoa's accuracy is unbelievable. He has targets all over this team. Mike Gesicki, Jalen Waddle. It seems like Mac Hollins gets a 50-yard grab at least once a game. And there's Phillip Lindsay, also a Pro Bowler on that offense. Myles Gaskin. Tua has so much to work with, and he just keeps finding success with this team. And I think the Miami organization has really bought in that this is their new franchise quarterback. I'd love to see how he plays in the playoffs with that debut, because we all know what happened in Week 17 last season when the Bills absolutely destroyed the Dolphins, I think 56-16, just to get into the playoffs. But I want to see how Tua plays in the playoffs. And this is a new era in Miami. And
go ahead.
Sorry, one more thing. Could we see who the 49ers play in the next 2 weeks? Because I don't really have much faith in Trey Lance.
They play the Texans this coming week. I know that.
Yeah, Texans and Rams.
I don't know. I think Garoppolo's injuries look serious with the UCL. The Texans, Davis Mills looks better than most rookie quarterbacks right now. And the thing that I like about Davis Mills is that he's not afraid to shoot it deep. He's got some great deep accuracy that he had against the Chargers, the AFC Falcons, who they played in the last game. And it seems like Davis Mills is a project moving forward, and that's who they're going to roll with in the 2022 to 2023 season. So 49ers, they might be taken out of the playoffs. It is possible you could see the Vikings or the Saints sneak in.
Yeah, one thing I want to talk about, the Los Angeles Chargers here. I know they didn't have Austin Eckler this past week, but Justin Jackson had a really, really good game in relief of him. He had 2 touchdowns. He was very active in the receiving game. That's not the reason why they lost. Giving up over 30 points to the Texans, and of course there was a pick 6 at the end of the game that Justin Herbert threw. But really, that's who I'm disappointed in, is Justin Herbert. Multiple turnovers in this game against a not very good Texans defense, making Davis Mills look really, really good, like a legitimate NFL quarterback. I know he's been playing better, but when you're playing for a playoff spot, you can't afford that performance.
Well, who do they play in the next 2 games? Sorry to cut you off. Because
play the Broncos and the Raiders.
Oh, and
So the Broncos already beat them earlier in the season, and then the Raiders. What happened in that game? I forgot who won that.
The Chargers won. It was a Monday night game. Because remember, it was that really weird game where there was a lightning delay inside a dome.
And wait, and what was the final score of that?
I think it was 28-21 because the Chargers, they got up to a like 21-0 lead at half, and the Raiders came storming back. It was a tied game, and then the Chargers scored at the end to win.
Yeah, so I'd say if Denver has Bridgewater, they sweep the Chargers, and then the Raiders game, that Texans loss looks like it sucked the life out of them. I'd love to see them in the playoffs compete, but I don't see it after this loss. I kind of predicted that they were going to choke.
Yeah, I mean, I've been calling the AFC Falcons all year, and they keep on living up to it. I don't want them to live up to it. They have fun pieces. They would be fun to watch in the playoffs, but they're just so disappointing. They're so aggravating. I can't imagine being a Chargers fan. I mean, I know there's not a lot of them left because they made the entire city of San Diego mad, and not a lot of people in LA really care about them. But I mean, it's just disappointing. Like, because they are one of the most exciting teams when they're playing well. The problem is they don't show up every single week, and in this league, especially in that conference, with as competitive as it is, you just can't afford to not show up every week.
And I think, well, they do give up a lot of points on their defense. I'd say the defense is more of an issue than the offense, even if Herbert makes mistakes. I mean, look at the Cincinnati game whenever they were up 20, and then the Bengals come back and the Chargers win that game, but they give up a lot of points on defense. So I'd imagine in the offseason and free agency and the draft that they strictly focus on defense. I don't know how much more they really need to add to this offense, especially maybe a couple of more offensive line talent. But besides that, I'd focus on the defense if I were LA.
Oh, of course. I was looking up earlier. I'm looking up those Russian stats for the Raiders. The Chargers have the fourth worst Russian defense in the entire league. So just pitiful, and it's going to be really difficult, I think, for them to make it in because the Dolphins, I think they have a decent shot of winning out. I mean, that Dolphins-Titans game is 50-50 to me. I think the Ravens, I think they're done, in my opinion. I think they'll lose to the Rams this week. And then I think they play the Steelers again, if I'm right, in week 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't like their situation right now with all the injuries.
Just go. Could you go to Pittsburgh? I just want to see that one because
I know they play the Browns on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, so Browns and Ravens.
I'd say Pittsburgh wins those two somehow.
It would be very Pittsburgh, although they looked awful the other day against Kansas City. Now
That's going to make it interesting.
So this Kansas City Bengals game, to me, if Kansas City wins in Cincinnati, they're getting the 1 seed no matter what. Now, if Kansas City loses this week, then the Titans have a shot to steal the 1 seed. What the Titans would have to do is they'd have to win both games against Miami and Houston. They go to Houston next week, of course. They lost to Houston a couple of weeks ago in just a really bizarre loss. How do we see that playing out?
I mean, like I was saying earlier to you guys, I think before the podcast started, this might be the best team that Kansas City has faced since coming out of their slump. I mean, obviously Cincinnati is like been red hot lately. They just swept the Baltimore Ravens. Joe Burrow's been looking really good. Their wide receivers are awesome. They have a really good run game. They have a pretty good tight end in Uzomah as well. Their offensive line, they still aren't that great, but somehow Joe Burrow has been overcoming it this season. And of course, their pass rush has improved also. And their secondary is pretty damn good too. Now, I still think that Kansas City is probably the better team, probably the more well-rounded team, but also like the way this matches up, I could definitely see Cincinnati winning. And they'll look a lot more legitimate in people's eyes if they can beat the Chiefs. I think they have a realistic shot at doing so.
Well, who's home in that matchup?
Cincinnati's the home team.
I hope they win. I think they will win. And Kansas City, who do they play in Week 18? Because
I think they play the Chargers twice. I would assume it's the Broncos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it could be that Tennessee gets the 1 seed if if Cincinnati wins this game and Tennessee and Kansas City win one, lose one, Tennessee could get a tiebreaker because they absolutely destroyed them in the beginning of the season and take the 1 seed. But if I were a betting man again and Derrick Henry was healthy, I'd still take Tennessee over Kansas City any day.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Derrick Henry, reports are suggesting that he might be back next week for Houston because they kind of want to give him one game before the playoffs to get him going before it goes in. If we can get that 1 seed, I know the Titans are insanely inconsistent, but I think whoever gets this 1 seed is going to have a huge leg up on the rest of the AFC because you get to avoid the chaos of wild card weekend and you get home games. Now the Titans, I will say this. They haven't won a home playoff game in a long time. I believe it's been like 2003. That was the last time they won a home playoff game because in 2019, they went on that run on the road. They went to New England, went to Baltimore. In 2017, they won at Kansas City. Of course, last year they lost at home to Baltimore. In 2008, they were the 1 seed and lost at home to Baltimore. They have a lot of history with the Ravens in the playoffs.
Derrick Henry just can't pull a Todd Gurley this year. They do if they have any chance at all in the playoffs.
Yeah. Of course, we'll see what percentage he is at. Of course, it's a big difference between coming back from a foot injury and an ankle injury because he's come back from a foot injury. It just depends on how much he trusts his foot. But I do expect him to be very good when he comes back. Maybe not the dominance that we saw early in the season because I know we were talking about how Jonathan Taylor is the best running back in the NFL this season, but Derrick Henry was way above him when both of them were healthy. I'm not just saying that as a Titans fan. Like you can look at the rushing stats. He was carrying the Titans to just a really hot start. I believe we were 7-2 when he went down. Of course, we had beaten the Chiefs. We beat them heavily. They beat the Bills. Monday Night Football. They swept the Colts. So they had some really good runs with him. Of course, outside of that really puzzling loss to the Jets early on, of course, they lost to the Texans without Derrick Henry. And but the fact that the Titans are even in this spot at 10-5 is pretty remarkable. But they're going to have to try to win one more game without Derrick Henry this week. And that's going to be a tough task. Because obviously last week against the 49ers, we saw the return of A.J. Brown, and he was just absolutely dominant. He had 8 catches, 145, and a touchdown. It might have been 11 catches. But anyway, he had a lot of yards and catches in the second half, just absolutely dominant after what was a really frustrating first half. And, I have to give credit to Tennessee's backup offensive line. Guys like Dylan Radones, our third-round pick from North Dakota State last year, played very well. Like in that second half, didn't let up a sack, but really stood his ground and let Ryan Tannehill find A.J. Brown over and over again. And, they didn't make any critical mistakes, no turnovers. And actually, they kind of had a consistent running game. Our backups, Deontay Foreman and Hillard, have been running the ball well. Obviously, they're not Derrick Henry, but they don't need to be Derrick Henry. They are solid players, and I think moving forward, I think a guy like Deontay Foreman is going to provide a good change of pace to Derrick Henry because I do think in the years to come, the Titans need to find a way to take some of the load off of Derrick Henry because you can't just run him 30 games a year, 30 times a game. It's 17 games for 5 years and expect him to be the same player in 5 years. So running backs have a shorter shelf life for a reason, even a guy like Derrick Henry. So I think a guy like Deontay Foreman is going to be critical in order to preserve in Derrick Henry's prime for as long as possible. So, but if the Titans are going to make any type of Super Bowl run, it definitely starts and ends with Derrick Henry. We'll see what percentage
absolutely
he's at. But if they can find a way to get that 1 seed, that would be huge for the Titans' chances.
I mean, we'll see if, I don't know, maybe the Texans make an upset. But another placement within the AFC I'm thinking about is the Buffalo Bills. And I know Connor has a big hot take to discuss with this game. Seemed really happy over the weekend in our group chat, of course.
Yeah, that Bills win was decisive. It was really impressive to me. And like it didn't really seem like the Patriots were going to win this game. I mean, the run defense is still a big question about the Bills that I have. Damian Harris ran for over 100 yards, and I think maybe like 2 or 3 touchdowns. I think the biggest mistake that the Patriots made in this game is trusting Mac Jones. I felt like if he, threw the ball more than 3 times, which I had a good feeling that he would. I mean, considering the fact that doesn't really happen too much, alongside, the climate in Foxborough, I think they really changed up that game plan on Monday Night Football. I think 3 weeks ago, because of how bad the weather was, they really, focused on the run game. But some of the things that were really impressive to me offensively for the Bills, this was like the first time in a hot minute, maybe the entire season, that the O-line actually had really good play. And they had to shuffle around the O-line during the game too. Our backup guard, Ike Butker, who's been starting for the past couple months, I think ruptured his Achilles during the game. So they brought back Deion Dawkins, who was in an emergency role because this was like his second bout of COVID in like 4 months. So they bring him in. Spencer Brown back to right tackle. Okay, I'm just gonna stop talking about all that stuff because it's probably gonna bore the hell out of some of these non-Bills fans. But the offensive line like really stepped up, and that's the first time that I've really felt any confidence in their ability to protect Josh Allen. And the thing is, like, even when the offensive line broke down, like we saw Ryan Bates let up a pressure, let in a free rusher, and we saw a couple other plays where stuff like that happened with the offensive line. Josh improvised. Like, he didn't just panic. Like, he was able to, rely on not only his athleticism, but his just natural playmaking ability. Like, he just would throw the ball downfield to Diggs or Isaiah McKenzie, who was starting as the slot receiver because Cole Beasley had COVID, which was inevitable, but it is what it is. And he balled out. Career game for him, 11 receptions, 125 yards, and a touchdown. Honestly, I think he could potentially be the starting slot receiver for the Bills. And they could, ship Cole Beasley off to, I don't know, Detroit or whatever other team would need him. I don't know. Because, like, I feel like he adds more juice in yards after the catch. And he really showed up in this game. Josh Allen, one of the best games this season so far, threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, completed about 64% of his passes. He was on his game, man. Like,
yeah, he looked great. I mean,
yeah.
What I like this season, I feel like Diggs hasn't been as solid as he was last season, but Dawson Knox, man, he looks like a tight end 1. He is definitely, I would say, like the MVP of this team for this season. Just how he's given Josh Allen another reliable target. I would love to see the Bills make a deep playoff run, but I don't think this is the year.
I'll say this because I told you this in the group chat. That was one of the most composed performances I've ever seen from Josh Allen, because the Patriots kept coming, especially with Damian Harris. He had 3 touchdowns in that game, and it felt like the Patriots at any time were going to take control of the game. But every single time that the Bills offense came on there, they got out there and they controlled the clock. They had methodical drives. Josh Allen really wasn't going for big plays. He was just dinking and dunking, making sure that the Bills had sustained drives and kept the ball away from Mac Jones in that Patriots offense. And it worked. I mean, if you think back to that first matchup, the Buffalo Bills moved the ball very well against the Patriots. They just couldn't finish down at the goal line. Of course, partially that was due to the wind. That was there because you were there at that game, Connor. You know all about that.
Yeah.
But, they just, every time the Patriots threatened, they made a response drive. And that's what you got to do against a really good defense like the Patriots. But we do kind of have to wonder, too, about the Patriots. Are they cooling off a little bit? They're fortunate they get Jacksonville here at the end of this week. So they can get to 10-6. I think they'll get into the playoffs. But I know we mentioned this earlier. How much do you trust Mac Jones in the playoffs? We can't say because he's a rookie. We don't know what he's done. I know going back to his track record in college, he played it great in the playoffs last year in college football, but that's at Alabama where you have a talent advantage over everyone. This is different, and I'm curious to see how he rings the bell for the Patriots.
I don't think he's one and done in the playoffs. I think he's definitely going to get a couple wins. And Nick, go to the Week 18 matchup of New England. I just wanted to see that one real quick.
I think it's Miami. Yeah.
It's Miami?
Yep, at Miami.
So that's going to
be a do or die for Miami, especially if they lost this week.
And then who the Bills have Week 18? Because
that would be the Jets.
New York Jets.
Yeah, I take the Bills winning the AFC East. I think Miami with what they could do. I could see Miami definitely beating New England in a close matchup at home.
Yeah, the Bills just got to avoid the upset from the Falcons. And the Falcons aren't that good, but they still technically are in the playoff race. The Falcons are going to try to bring the kitchen sink to Buffalo. And I don't know if they really have what they need, because obviously they survived Tim Boyle's last drive the other day from the Detroit Lions, because Amon-Ra St. Brown was just going crazy on them, but they survived, and somehow they're there in the playoff race. And I think have to give Arthur Smith, their new head coach, a lot of credit for putting the Falcons in that position with all their deficiencies. But I think clearly there's no way they're making it in.
I mean, what I want to see, even if they don't make it in, is Pitts maybe break 1,000 yards this season. I think he's around anywhere from 840 to 860. I forgot, but I'd like to see him ball out these next couple of matchups, because next best tight end in the NFL.
Yeah, just looking at the NFC, I don't really see any team outside the top 7 that's going to make it in. Of course, Philadelphia, if they can survive Washington, I believe they play. They'll play either the Cowboys or the Giants. Okay, so they have to play the Cowboys.
But they're going to take the 6th seed easily, because I think if you put Trey Lance in those last 2 games, he's not going to win. I don't even think he could win against the Texans. I think Davis Mills is going to have more momentum. 49ers are at home, it looks like, but Davis Mills is going to have momentum coming in.
We're looking at the Saints here. So they have the Panthers and the Falcons. They could definitely win both of those games. So that could get them to 9-8. If the 49ers were to lose those last 2 games, that would put the Saints over the Niners. The Vikings, I know they are at Packers, and they have the Bears at home the last week. And it feels like out of all these teams, they would have the best shot. And the Washington, they have the Eagles and the Giants, but I don't think they have much of a shot. I don't really know how much this even matters, because I don't think any of these teams have any shot making any run. I don't even know which one of these teams would have the best shot to put off an upset. I mean, it feels like the Niners would, because here's the thing. I think the Niners are a quarterback away from being a legitimate championship contender. Like, if you look at the pieces they have on defense, you look at all the options they have in the running game. They have the pieces, just their quarterback play is not there. I've said throughout the year, I like Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he's a good game managing quarterback. But if y'all, if any of you watched that game against the Titans, he's the reason why they lost. He missed Kyle Juszczyk's down in the red zone. It would have been a touchdown. They had to settle for a field goal on that drive. He missed a couple of other big plays. He had 2 interceptions that were killer for the Titans. When the Titans were flailing in the first half, they should have been up by more than 10 at halftime. But he was the reason why the Titans stayed in that game. And when the Titans offense got going, the Niners just couldn't respond. And that was because of Jimmy Garoppolo's poor play. So in a way, Trey Lance now has a chance to take that job if he's able to go out there and be dynamic. But I kind of agree with you, Lee, on that. I don't see them being very dynamic on offense. Now, I do think they'll be able to get past the Texans this week. I think it'll be a close game. And who is our last game? It's either Seattle. Yeah, okay, it's the Rams. So I think they'll lose that last game. So they can finish 9-8. And they'll get them in. Or should get them in. But I just don't think that they'll do much of anything in the postseason.
The thing that I'll be watching for,
and also the Eagles. And one thing that's really. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick little blurb about Trey Lance. One of the things that I'm going to be watching for, in terms of Trey Lance's play at least in this coming week, because I think there still is a possibility that Jimmy G could play in Week 18. Something that was very apparent in his game in college, and also in the one or two games that he started for the Niners this season, was that Trey Lance is a first read quarterback. If he doesn't see his first target open, he'll just run the ball. That's one of the reasons why he didn't throw any interceptions, but in college. But the NFL is a completely different game. He can't get away with that. And, we saw that in his first couple starts. He tried to rely on his athleticism and his mobility, and it backfired on him. I think they probably could have scored a touchdown if he just, moved on from his first progression rather than just saying, screw it, I'm just going to try and run this into the end zone. And hopefully I can get in. It'll be an easier challenge with Houston, I think. But also Houston feels like one of those teams that is obviously bad. But I think their mentality, in the way that David Coley kind of hypes up these guys, he certainly wasn't an inspiring coaching hire. But I think he helps rally these guys to see beyond what the media says about the Houston Texans and how bad they are as a team and as an organization. And they can pull off some upsets in any given Sunday league. Yeah. So it won't be easy necessarily for Trey Lance, but I think it'll be less of a challenge considerably than the Cardinals that he played against earlier on in the season.
I'll say this, I know they won't be in consideration for Coach of the Year, but David Coley and Dan Campbell, I think they should both be, if there were a motivation Coach of the Year, I think those two should be up for consideration, because obviously I think the Lions and Texans, a lot of people thought they were going to go 0-17, that they had no shot. They maybe were going to win 1-2 games. I know their records aren't any good, but I think they have both outplayed expectation. They've been competitive in a lot of their games, and I think there has to be at least a slight sliver of optimism in both of those franchises, especially with a lot of the young players that they have. And we'll just have to see how they build and execute it for years. And I'm curious to see how long those coaches will get at those respective stops, because both of those jobs are rebuilding jobs. They're not going to be playoff contenders next year, or really probably in the next 2 years. But if you give those teams some time, maybe they can build into something. But I think it's going to be a while. But kind of last thing I'm going to look at here is this number one seed. The Packers, they have the leg up. They have Minnesota and Detroit. They're going to be big favorites in both of those games. Do we see any way they lose one of those two games? Because I feel like they're going to take care of it here.
No, I think they beat Minnesota this time, and I think the Lions game will be an easy win for them.
I think that Week 18 game against the Lions, there could be the potential for an upset. But I only say that because I think Green Bay will mostly rest their starters. At the same time, though, Jordan Love could play like a Matt Flynn kind of game against the Lions with the Packers. I mean, it happened in 2011. So I think there's the potential for Jordan Love to really show out. But yeah, I think the Lions game definitely has the potential for an upset. But I think the Vikings there isn't that big of a chance for them to win. I think they're playing in Lambeau this time around. Yeah, so it's I don't really feel like I have much confidence in the Vikings in this game.
Even if Love starts that game, if it's in Lambeau against Detroit, then he has the advantage there, and I'm interested to see how he plays against Detroit compared to a team like Kansas City. But they'll probably rest Rodgers for that game. I don't think they're going to use him all 17 regular season games.
I'll say this. I think the hardest games remaining for any of these four teams, the Rams this week at the Ravens, the Cowboys, they kind of have a tough end with the Cardinals and the Eagles. But I think all four of these teams are going to win out. And I think, as I said earlier, the Bucs, I think, would jump the Cowboys if I read that correctly in terms of like the head-to-head. And of course, you have the Rams in there. So I don't know exactly how that all play out, but obviously if the Rams win out, they win the NFC West, and of course Dallas and Tampa Bay already have won their divisions. So yeah, if you're these teams, I guess just kind of wrapping up this discussion, how hard do you push? Because actually, if you're the Bucks, you don't have a lot of injuries, but you still got Tom Brady there. Just how hard are you pushing for that 1 seed? Considering that last year you went on the road and won all 3 of your road games to get to the Super Bowl. Just how important really is it to get that 1 week of rest versus the 18-week schedule that we have and trying to make sure your guys are ready to go for the playoffs?
I don't think that they really do all that much in terms of trying to rally for the 1 seed. I think Green Bay will probably have it locked up by then. But I mean, there is a chance, like I said earlier, that they do blow that game against Detroit. But I personally think Green Bay will repeat as the 1 seed in the NFC this season. And I don't know if there's all that much that Dallas or the Rams or Tampa Bay could really do in order to replace them as the 1 seed.
If I'm the Bucks, I would rest Tom Brady week 18 against Carolina. I'd like to see like Blaine Gabbert or Kyle Trask, who they drafted high, but I wouldn't push much for it, especially with the success they had with Brady in the playoffs. Let him rest week 18. That's what I would do. Whatever seed you get, that first round, they're probably going to walk right through it.
Would you rest him this week? I mean, they're playing the Jets. And I know the Jets, they've pulled off an upset or 2, but they're just – I know they'd be the Jags last week, but it's the Jaguars.
Probably won't. I mean, we'd have to see how they play against Minnesota, but I don't see them resting Brady this week. He could also make a final push for the MVP award if he maybe goes and throws like 5-6 touchdowns against the Jets.
Yeah. So that's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Of course, we'll also look at it again next week because we'll have a much clearer picture. There's so many scenarios in terms of how the rest of the season could play out. But kind of to move on to betting lines. Connor, I know you have 4 games you would like to discuss. I know you kind of alluded to one of them in our long playoff picture discussion.
But yeah, I teased about half of them already, but I'm going to talk about what I think about these games anyways. Again, like last week, I'm going to be talking about 4 games that could be upsets. I'm going to start off with the marquee matchup, at least in terms of the AFC. We're going to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Chiefs are favored by 5 points, and the over-under is 50. Now, the Chiefs just won their division and are the number 1 seed in the AFC. Their offense is rolling. Their defense at this point of the season is probably the best it's ever been since Mahomes became QB1 in Kansas City. Meanwhile, the Bengals just beat the crap out of the Ravens on Sunday with Joe Burrow's historic performance, throwing for over 500 yards. And their offense is great, apart from their offensive line. Their pass rush is really good, and their secondary includes one of the best safeties in the league in Jesse Bates. Like I said earlier, probably the best team that the Chiefs have played since ending their slump, considering that when they played the Cowboys earlier on in the season, they were somewhat injured on offense. And I think the Bengals honestly could realistically upset KC. So considering that and the point spread, I think the Bengals win. And I'm going to be talking next about the Tennessee Titans or the Miami Dolphins versus the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are favored by 3.5 points, and the over-under is 41. Now, the Titans just beat the Niners by a field goal on Thursday Night Football when all of us thought that the Niners were going to win. A.J. Brown really came in clutch for them after spending some time on injured reserve. And their defense also came through with 2 picks. So they were all on both sides of the ball. Meanwhile, the Miami Dolphins are on a 7-game win streak and could realistically clinch a playoff berth if they win out. Now, Tua, I don't think he's spectacular, but he's efficient and he's accurate, like former Miami quarterback Ryan Tannehill. While A.J. Brown dealt with the cooked Josh Norman on Thursday, he'll be dealing with Xavier Howard instead in this game. And with Derrick Henry still out, the Titans will need to rely on Tannehill to win this game for them. And with the Dolphins' pass rush, as well as their corners, two of the best corners in the league, in Xavier Howard and Byron Jones. I think it'll be hard for them to do this week, and I think the Dolphins will win this thing. This next matchup that I'm going to be talking about, two NFC South teams. It's going to be the Carolina Panthers versus the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are favored by 7 points, and the over-under is 38. Now, the Panthers, some of us thought that they could be in the playoffs. They're obviously not a playoff team. They were just eliminated from the playoffs this past week. They're sitting at 5-10 right now, I think. And the Saints, they're still alive technically, but they dropped a really important game against the Dolphins on Monday Night Football last night. Obviously, they started Ian Buck quarterback, and, he's a Notre Dame quarterback, so those don't really do that well in the NFL. Now, the QBs on both teams, whether the Saints are starting Ian Buck or not, they absolutely suck. I'm just going to be honest. So the game will depend on defense and how much the QBs on that field suck in that game. Now, Taysom Hill for the Saints as well, as long as he comes off the COVID list, which I think he will. He'll probably be starting this game. And Taysom Hill, in my opinion, he's what people thought Josh Allen was in 2018, if you know what I mean. Cam Newton for the Panthers, still an elusive runner, but he can barely throw the ball at this point. And Donald sucks, as we all know by now, but he's a better arm talent at this point than the other QBs in this game. And I trust the Panthers more to add points onto the board than I do the Saints. Corona. Wow. And I think the Panthers win. And the last game that I'm going to be talking about, it's going to be an AFC West matchup. Playoff implications in this game. It's going to be the Denver Broncos versus the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers are favored by 5.5 points, and the over-under is 45. Now, the Chargers are currently charging their season away, living up to their AFC Falcons reputation. They just lost in Houston, where their run defense helped Rex Burkhead look like Barry Sanders, and their pass defense helped Davis Mills play the best out of any rookie quarterback this week. Herbert also wasn't that sharp either. He threw a pick six. Now, this Broncos offense, as we all know, sucks. It's really boring to watch. But at least Javonte Williams is a pretty good running back. Really, really good draft pick. And the Chargers' run defense, as we all know, stinks. Now, I think the Chargers are the better team in this matchup. They got the better quarterback. We could just keep going on. But I still think that they could charter this game away. I think the Broncos defense is pretty underrated, as I've been saying for a while now. And I think the Broncos sweep the Chargers in this game. And those are my 4 Week 17 matchups. Now let's get into it.
I agree with all 4 of those matchups. Could you just share the line again with Miami and Tennessee? Just want to hear that real quick.
Miami and Tennessee, the Tides are favored by 3.5 points, and the over-under is 41.
Yeah, I'm going to say this on the over-under in this game, too, because the weather down here in Tennessee this weekend is going to be wild. They're saying severe weather, maybe tornado Saturday. Then Sunday, the temperature is going to plummet, and there's a chance of snow. Now, I'm planning on heading up to this game in Nashville. And obviously, I started to be chilly, but to go to a game in snow in Tennessee is exceptionally rare. That has rarely happened at any level here. So, for two teams based in the South, I do think if that ends up happening, and it's not a high chance this happens, but if it does snow, I definitely take the under in this game because there are two teams. Their defenses are better than the opposing offenses, in my opinion. And if you add adverse weather to those conditions, I do think that this will be a relatively low-scoring game. It's just my personal advice.
Wait, it's 41.5 or 40.5?
It's right at 41.
41.
I take the over in this game, actually. We just saw what happened with Seattle versus Chicago. That game went to 49 points. I would definitely take the over in that game. I take Miami as the underdogs, and I'd see Miami putting up a lot of points. I see them making a big upset. I see Miami scoring a lot and some garbage time touchdown by the Titans. I don't know why. It's just that when you win 7 games straight and your locker room rallies around you as the franchise QB who a lot of fans doubted, who a lot of people doubted whenever they were thinking about making a big move for Deshaun Watson. You win 7 straight, and the people of Miami love Tua Tagovailoa. I saw him at the Miami Heat game versus the Memphis Grizzlies, even after that game versus the Giants. And why should that momentum stop? I don't think it will.
Yeah, I'm excited to see him play because I saw him play a couple of times at Alabama versus my Tennessee Vols, and that he was the most accurate QB I saw in college. Just some of the throws he was making, because very few quarterbacks at the college level are able to hit their receivers in stride the way that Tua was able to. And I knew he had the talent at Alabama around him, but still, he was elevating that talent, and I'm very interested to see how he's evolved into the NFL. Just watching him in person, because it's one thing to watch them evolve on TV. There's another thing to see them evolve in person.
I'd make a bold prediction right now. I'd say Jalen Waddle gets over 125 yards receiving. Maybe even over 150 yards receiving, but I'll set it at 125. I have a good feeling about this being another big career game in his rookie season, being the next new number one in Miami. I think, imagine if they had Will Fuller this year, how much better they would be. But
I'll say this though, I do think the Titans defense
Says
has
that.
been playing very well here in the second half, and if the Titans can get pressure to Tua Tagovailoa, I do think they can force him into some mistakes. But I do think the corner play has been suspect at times. Of course, after you got Kevin Byard, one of the best safeties in the entire league, back there in the secondary. But I think really the key here for the Titans on defense is getting to Tua. And of course, you got guys like Jeffrey Simmons, you have Daniel Archery. I do think that's where where the make or break for the Titans defense. Really on the offense, it's about sustaining drives. And this Dolphins defense has been playing really well. I know they were playing Ian Book yesterday, but still, got to sustain drives. You got to make it through one more game without Derrick Henry. And we'll see if A.J. Brown can have another massive game, because I think he's going to have a lot riding on him once again, like he did against the 49ers, at least without Henry. And of course, we'll have to see if Julio Jones can go and what type of impact he can bring to this game.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, go ahead. I haven't heard your opinion yet.
I will say, though, do not understate the effect that weather conditions will have on this game. If it is as serious as Nick says that it will be, then this game will suck ass to watch if the weather is terrible. If I'm being honest, like if it's like complete downpour, like if it's snowing like it did in that New England Buffalo game, back at Ralph Wilson or Highmark Stadium.
I doubt it will. It won't be quite that cold, I think, but it's a really strong weather system supposed to move through. So I think it'll be very interesting to see. And then, of course, this might not be the only game that's going to be affected. Like Cincinnati, I think that game could get affected by weather. So it'll be just definitely always pay attention to what the weather forecast is going to be when you're betting a game in an outdoor stadium.
But like that momentum there, and I think something that's going to be underrated to watch, look for Myles Gaskin or Phillip Lindsay to get some big first downs on the ground. That's all I'm going to say. I honestly think it's going to be a Miami blowout. You have 7 wins straight. How does that momentum stop? And I think that's going to carry over into New England, and they will beat them at home, I think.
Okay, I just looked up the weather. I think like the really severe weather is going to be gone after Saturday. It'll be pretty cold, but I think that they'll probably be fine. There might be some commitment to the run that we'll see. Obviously, Tennessee's run game without Derrick Henry is not the same whatsoever, and I don't think the Miami run game is all that great either. But I don't think they'll be limited whatsoever really within this matchup. I think we'll be able to see what Tua and Tannehill can do, when the weather is in typical Southern weather conditions.
Right.
I think they'll be fine.
But I think if you're the Miami offense, and let's say I set Waddle to have 125 receiving yards. Let's say he doesn't do that. I would say have him occupy Kevin Byard and some of those routes going deep, and look for somebody like Matt Collins. Look for Gesicki on some of those out routes. If you could just occupy the attention of the top Tennessee players and find a receiver to get touches, then why not? I honestly see Tua having his best passing game of the season in this game. I know he threw 4 touchdowns against, I think it was the Jaguars or the Falcons. I forget which one, but great passing game by him, and I'm sure Tannehill will probably hit 300 yards barely in this game.
Of course, the one thing I am also concerned about, what's the mentality here? Because, you win this game, you win a division. And that's obviously a huge deal. They've only done that once in the past decade. And you're in the race for this 1 seed. But then again, you still have that pressure of, okay, that you haven't clinched the division, that if you lose out, there's a chance that you get knocked out of the division win, and then even lighter chance that you get knocked out of the playoffs altogether because you still haven't technically clinched a playoff spot. Hopefully they don't get into a situation where they're scoreboard watching and hoping for the Bengals and for the Raiders to win. Take care of business on your own because that's the only business you can take care of. I don't know. I don't know who I'm going to pick here. To me, honestly, I know the Dolphins are on a 7-game winning streak, and I may be a little bit biased here. Considering this is the first game of the year I'm going to, I'm feeling a Titans winner. I think it'll be a very tight game, but I do think the Titans found a lot of life last week in that second half because that was the first time their offense had looked any good in weeks since Derrick Henry has gone down, and I think every NFL team that goes on a late season run, they have a spark at some point. And to me, I think that spark was last week, and they've got 10 more days to get healthy. I know they've had some COVID issues earlier on this week, including Julio Jones. So we'll see who's available for Sunday. But I just have a feeling, and because I know the Dolphins, they dominated the game yesterday, but it wasn't like they just ran them out of this game. They kind of had to claw their way to a dominant win, if that makes any sense.
I just feel like they take the over. I find it interesting you take the under. Like, I understand why you would, but I just have a feeling it's going to be higher scoring. And going back to your point about Julio Jones, I think we all hyped him up to be this great signing, especially the NFL, and a lot of people were excited for it, but looks like he's another AJ Green where it looks like his career is just coming to a downfall and he just becomes less of a top receiver and more of one of the background guys on a new team.
I should have seen that coming, but he just can't stay healthy. But hey, as long as he's there in January and can provide some value, I mean that's really what you signed him for, to get you over the top in the postseason. So we'll see if he's able to provide that for the Titans here coming up. But any other games we want to talk about sports betting wise here before moving on to player of the week?
Just a little thing about the Chiefs Bengals game. I'd probably bet the over.
I'd agree with that.
100%.
Yeah, the Bengals offense or the Chiefs defense is going to be really good because the Chiefs defense is playing so much better right now, but you do have to question the quality of the offenses they've been playing. I know they played really, really well against Dallas a couple of weeks ago, but Dallas had some injuries at the time. Dak wasn't 100%. I think this Joe Burrow is the best QB they've played since Dak, and it's going to be an interesting challenge. But you do also have to wonder, too, on the Bengals side, after a huge win last week, after the way Burrow's been playing, does the moment get too big for them? Again, remember, this is still a really young football team. This is Burrow in his second year. A lot of these players don't have playoff experience. And this is going to be a playoff type game for the Bengals. You have that division lead. You got the rest of the division trying to come after you. Does that give you pause about the Bengals in this game? Because we talk about all the young quarterbacks without playoff experience, but do we believe it?
I don't think the stage is too big for Joe Burrow. I'd see a big performance by Mixon. I could see him getting over 100 yards. I could see, for some reason, I think CJ Uzomah will have a big game of over 100 yards receiving. I think they're going to go with a more unconventional game plan than normal in this game and stick to a more balanced approach than what they did last week. But there are targets all around this offense, and I was even thinking about it, not this season, but I think next season they could be big Super Bowl favorites if they get to work on that defense and O-line in the offseason. But that's next season.
Yeah, I feel like the Chiefs, unfortunately, the rest of the AFC messed around too much and has let them get back into that 1 seed. And because you got to think about last week, they didn't have Travis Kelce. Tyreek Hill only had 2 catches in that game. But other guys like Byron Pringle stepped up. Cole Harmon got a touchdown. they had a pretty decent running attack with Terrell Williams and Derek Gore. Players that you wouldn't think about being major contributors for the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, was solid, didn't make any major mistakes. I know they're not the Chiefs team of old, but with this week with Travis Kelce coming back, I like the Chiefs in this game. I think it'll be a good game. It'll be entertaining, but I think the Chiefs win by like 7 to 10 points. I believe in them right now to secure that 1 seed, which will do wonders for their Super Bowl chances. So
we'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on to player of the week. Of course, we're only going to have 3 this week, so I'll throw it over to Leon. Who is your player of the week?
So I know the obvious ones are Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, but I'll be nice not let somebody else do Joe Burrow. Damian Harris, 103 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground against the Buffalo Bills at home. I do think Harris is the future of this league with Bill Belichick's game plan that he always sticks to. Sort of somebody who I think is second to Jonathan Taylor this year in terms of the impact that they have made as a breakout player. I'm looking forward to what the Patriots can do moving forward with Harris and this dominant run game.
Connor, who's your player of the week?
All right. So unlike Leon, I'm going to go for the obvious one here, Joe Burrow. A absolutely historic Sunday for him. He went 37 for 46, completing a little over 80% of his passes, 525 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a 143.2 passer rating. Ravens fans, yeah, I know he was playing a secondary full of Uber drivers. I do not care. That's still an historic performance. Well, no matter who was in that secondary.
Yeah, especially a team that had been competitive. I mean, they almost beat the Rodgers and the Packers the week before. Amazing performance. And for me, I'm going to go with Josh Allen. He probably has been on this list 4 or 5 times this year, but 30 of 47, 314, 3 touchdowns, 64 yards rushing as well. Just methodical, was able to keep the ball away from the Patriots throughout the game, responded every single time the Patriots put pressure on the Bills, especially in that second half, spread the ball around, just very composed. I think for a long time, there's been a criticism of Josh Allen that he falls short in big games, but he's really beginning to take those next steps to win in those situations. And that's going to be massive if the Bills are going to make a deep playoff run. And that performance has to give you confidence that he's going to have the capability of doing that, depending on matchups and the like. Of course, we'll see if he's able to lead the Bills to clinching that AFC East here in the next 2 weeks with their games with the Falcons and the Jets. So before we wrap up, does anyone have any last comments or points you would like to bring up?
Listen, the New York Giants. It's been tough being a Giants fan this season. It's very difficult. They want to keep Daniel Jones and Joe Judge. I do not know why, but expect next season to be the same as this season. Just a complete disappointment. It's just been so difficult. I tune into the other games. I have fun watching them, but I see a Giants and Eagles game, and it's a tough 3 hours of football.
I personally hope for my team that Santa sends the Buffalo Bills and the Bills Mafia a late Christmas present and lets Miami clinch the 6th seed in the playoffs and us to clinch the 3rd seed so that we can play them again at home and kick their ass. That would be really great. Yeah, that's all I got to say.
Yeah, and also the obvious of one Derrick Henry back. I'm looking forward because I've never been to an NFL game, to be honest with you, and looking forward to going to my first one this weekend. Dolphins Titans. I think it's going to be a fantastic game, and it's going to be interesting to see and to go to a game with that type of playoff implications is going to be really fun to watch to unfold live in person. And just a kind of last point on the New York thing, at what point does the NFL step in and be like, okay, Jets, Giants, we can't continue to have our largest market be dominated by awful teams? Like, I don't know if there's anything the NFL can do to force one or both the New York teams to get their stuff together, because it's just it's just insanity. Because like, look at the Los Angeles teams; they're competitive. The Bears, I mean, they're a mess, but you know, I really feel like it's hurting the NFL for the New York teams. It almost reminds me of what it was like for the NBA for years. Because remember when the Knicks and Nets both were just terrible for like 10, 15 years. And of course, now you got the Nets, who are doing really well now. The Knicks are average, but I don't know. I don't know if there's NFL anything they can do, but I don't think it's good for a league for New York City to be just bad for half a decade running at this point.
I remember I suggested the idea of like bringing like Matt Ryan to compete with Daniel Jones. I'm sure Atlanta's probably gonna keep Matt Ryan around, but we'll see what happens. I hope they get somebody that's decent in the offseason. I'd love to see like Tyler Huntley or like Gardner Minshew in the New York Giants uniform. Just somebody like give us some energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just for the sake of all New York fans, both Giants and Jets, it'd be nice to see them make a lot of progress next year. But it starts with the offseason, and unfortunately, I don't think they're making the moves necessary to put them to make themselves better. But that's all the time we have for the episode 16 of the Instant Review podcast. We'll be back next week for our first episode of 2022, as we will be recapping week 17, getting ready for the final regular season week of the NFL. It's so weird, week 17 no longer being the final week, but hey, one more week of football, cannot complain about that. We'll be recapping all NFL-based news and really breaking down the playoff picture, because from here on out, it's playoffs as we get ready for the road to the Super Bowl in Los Angeles, as we will soon know who takes home the Lombardi Trophy in the 2021-22 season. So for Leon Taryan and Conor Kennedy, I'm Nicholas Hill. Thank you for watching the Instant Review podcast. We will see you in 2022. Everyone have a safe, happy New Year, safe weekend, and we will see you next week.